Hello, everybody. I'm Jay with the Minnesota AARP State Office. And whenever we survey our members about their concerns and interests, staying safe from fraud and identity theft is always on the top of that list. And that's why we run our Fraud Watch Network program. It helps people just stay safe from fraud and from identity theft and avoid financial crime. And it's our fraud fighter volunteers and I who take reports of scams from all across the state and across the country. And we share that information with you so you can stay a step ahead of the con artists. And you can be a fraud fighter too. So right now, while we're speaking with you live here on Facebook and YouTube, enter in the comment section if you've seen a scam or if you have tips for people on how to avoid scams. Put it in the comments and you will be helping other people avoid fraud and identity theft too. So today I'm joined by one of our fraud fighter volunteers, and this is Jan. Jan has also had her own experience with a scammer that she's going to tell us about today. So thanks for joining us, Jan. And why don't you go ahead and just tell us what happened?
Well, thanks, Jay. And thanks to everybody for checking in and paying attention to things for yourself. And I'm very passionate about helping people. I have a nursing background, and I'm really anxious to try and see whether or not there are things that I can do that will help you avoid some of the mistakes that I've made with online romance scams. You know, my husband passed a couple of years ago, and I found myself in a spot where I didn't realize how vulnerable I was, but I was vulnerable, and I'm trusting, just like normal people. I was looking to find a good man, someone who we could share some things with, enjoy each other's company. I was a first-time user of online dating. And I looked around and I heard terrible things about it, but I looked around, I tried to find the best, most reputable site I could find. And I chatted for a number of times with several men. I think they were men. And then I, quote unquote, met somebody who was an incredibly handsome man, based on the pictures that he set online. And I'll say more about that in a moment. And he was quite articulate and seemed quite interested in me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we just appreciate you sharing your story with folks here today, and we know it's going to help people avoid similar scams that are out there. We're going to talk all about these romance scams, so thanks for folks for joining us today. We're going to learn a lot. And I want to say for those watching, don't stop now just because you're not dating online. Most of the romance scams we hear about now, they start on Facebook, and they even start with these with gaming apps like playing cards or playing Scrabble or Words with Friends online, and the scammers are creating their profiles on these games, and they make friends with people, and pretty soon they're asking for money. So, Jan, looking back to when you met this scammer, what about his story made you want to form a relationship and get to know him?
Well, as I said, I was vulnerable, and so I probably could have seen through some of the things that I would now see through. But first and foremost, he asked a lot of questions about me and my family. He seemed very genuinely interested in them. And for most of us, there isn't anything more important than family or more you're comfortable talking about than your family. In retrospect, this was the biggest reason why he seemed attractive to me. But as it turns out, it's also one of the biggest red flags. He was very flattering about my profile and about my pictures. I did share with him about the passing of my husband, and he was quite articulate about his sadness. And then he went on to tell me a story about his wife, who had also passed from the same disease. And then finally, and I think probably the hardest part of all to kind of ignore, was he told me just an awful, terrible story about his childhood. And how he had grown up, and the pain that he had experienced as a young boy, and living alone with a mother who was single. It just all tugged at the heartstrings.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when we use this word con artist, where that comes from is the word confidence. And I think that means certain things in the dating game out there, right? And imagine that he's saying all these perfect things because it's all fake. So asking questions of you, learning about you, and then he can make up the perfect story to come after you. So looking back on what you know now, what do you think were the big red flags that people should look for when they meet someone online?
There are some really, really specific red flags. When I talk to people who've been scammed in romances, they're almost always the same. In retrospect, I didn't recognize them at first. In fact, when I was talking about this guy to friends and family, they said, Jan, this is a scam. There's no way this is not true. And I ignored all of them because for some reason I thought I was smarter than they were. But probably the three or four biggest things are there's a fairly quick rush to an escalation of romantic language in the use of I love you, I can't live without you, I want you, for the rest of my life, that kind of thing. That happens almost always with everyone, and usually within 2 or 3 weeks of starting an online relationship. He had every excuse in the book about why he couldn't FaceTime or why he couldn't do a video call on Duo. The first excuse he gave me was that his granddaughter had dropped his phone in the bathtub and the phone was no longer working. The second one he used was that he had to get a different phone because he threw his phone in frustration at an airport trying to get home to me, and the phone broke, so he had to get a different phone and it didn't have a camera. So in retrospect, I can laugh at it now, but it was something I fell for at the time. He guilted me about ghosting him, and I didn't even know what ghosting meant at that time. But essentially, I just kind of didn't answer his phone calls for a month. And when he got back on the phone, he really threw the guilt trip on me, and I fell for that too. And then the last thing was he called me from different phone numbers. So when I wouldn't pick up one phone number, he'd call me from another phone number. And then I realized, oh my gosh, he's using burner phones. And the only reason I knew about that is because I watched CSI on TV. So all of those things is, they're all red flags when they position themselves as I've got no other family than you. You're all I've got in this whole world. And finally, when you ask them for proof of identity or their address, they'll never give it to you. There's always an excuse why they won't. And if for some reason you do get a driver's license or a passport, for example, it's always fake.
Sure. Well, right. And that's a lot. What great insights that you're sharing with folks right now about all those red flags to be on the lookout for. By chance, did he say he was wealthy and that he had some sort of romantic job that he was traveling around doing?
Well, yes, that's another thing. They're almost always not U.S. nationals. Yeah. Well, actually, Jay, I should have said this at the beginning. I was caught by 2 catfishers. The first one, and this is very common, was an engineer on an oil rig in the North Sea.
Yeah.
The second one was actually in Poland, trying to recoup his very, very wealthy father's inheritance from Poland, and then be back and use it all up on me, I guess.
Yeah, it's a common part of the story, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Too good to be true.
Absolutely.
So how did you eventually get out of the situation?
Well, I went to the local police, which I strongly recommend anybody does who gets involved with a scam. There may not be anything they can do right away, but at least to get a name and some background information. But I went to the police, and that was after my adult children kind of did an intervention with me at home. They all came to my house. My son-in-law had done a reverse image search on this guy and found that he had appropriated the name and background of someone who lived in Germany. So it wasn't even his face or his pictures, and none of his story was true. And, I still didn't believe him. I thought, oh, this can't be right. But I went to the local police, and they were quick to tell me, although very kindly, that this is a scam while they don't know this guy's name. And they haven't run into him personally before, it's a scam. And so let him go and just don't pick up the phone anymore. So next time he called, I confronted him with what I had learned. He absolutely blew up, told me that I had to trust him, that if I didn't trust him, we didn't have a relationship. And I said, yeah, I guess not. So after that, I just quit picking up the phone anytime I didn't recognize a number, and eventually he gave up calling.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure glad you got out of it. And he used so many different psychological tricks or whatever you want to call them. But then at the end, that anger trick is such a powerful one because it gets that emotional response from you or me or anyone to be yelled at. And yeah, so it's a very emotional and psychological game. I'm glad it's over for you, and now we're doing some good to help other people get past it. So I got to tell people here quick that about AARP's new program. It's a partnership with Volunteers of America nationwide, and it's called REST. And REST stands for Resilience, Strength, and Time. It's designed to address the emotional impact of these kind of experiences, being victimized in a scam. And so every day right now, or just about every day, we offer free peer facilitated groups and their support groups. So people meet online. They're facilitated by someone who's really good at, running a support group for people who are under stress and have been victimized. It can be to attend, people can be a victim, someone who's lost money, or it can be their family members or caregivers who want to attend these or support groups and learn and share. They're an hour long, and they're on the computer, or you can do them on your smartphone or tablet. So the website to go to it's on your screen. It's aarp.org/fraud support. So you can see when they're scheduled. You can learn more about them. And then hopefully a lot of folks out there will be joining these support groups to help each other. So Jan, kind of your final thoughts here. I know it's personal, but how do you feel about this situation now, looking back at the whole thing?
Well, it sure is personal. But if I can help one person, man or woman, avoid falling into some of the traps that I fell into with this guy, I'll tell this story 1,000 times. It's embarrassing that I was taken in by not just one, but two catfishers. I consider myself a pretty smart person, a very well-meaning woman, but just to think about someone being able to take someone who's middle-aged and pretty well educated and call them in like this. These people are predators. They are incredibly good at finding and exploiting vulnerabilities of people, whether it's, pain of a lost spouse, unhappiness with life, sadness with not having a relationship. They are so much better than I will ever be at listening for cues and clues that will give them just the little things they need to know to weasel their way in and exploit you. So I don't think of myself as a victim. I am lucky that neither my family nor I were harmed by this, but I hope that by sharing my story that, other people can avoid it as well.
Absolutely. And we can't thank you enough for joining us to do that today. I look forward to working with you going forward here as well. And what you said about considering yourself and being a smart, intelligent person, that's a myth about scam victims, that smart people don't get victimized. It's not about intelligence. There's a lot of other factors that go into these situations. So now everyone out there who's heard your story can tell their friends and family what they learned, and they're helping each other avoid these kind of scams and others. So be safe out there, everyone. And you can visit our website. It's aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. You can learn more about romance scams. You can, get help with the other scams that you've seen and share them with each other. So thanks for joining us today.